Welcome. I'm so very grateful that you all joined us tonight and that you've joined us every day for the last several weeks. As we begin, I'd like to take a moment of silence for those who lost their lives in Florida and a stand against those people who believe that violence is an answer to whatever their pains may be. When you look at the website for the Southern Poverty Law Center, what will strike you are the words that they are fighting hate, that they are teaching tolerance, and that they are seeking justice. We are here tonight because the University of Tennessee, the flagship campus in the state of Tennessee, stands with them. I can't think of words that help describe who we are and what we're about even more. Fighting hate, teaching tolerance, and seeking justice. I'm so grateful that we were able to align our calendars in such a way that Lecia Brooks could join us. And I don't want to take a lot of time, but I want to tell you a little bit about the work that she's done in her life. She's been at the Southern Poverty Law Center for quite a number of years. Not surprising, she has a degree in political science. We political scientists, I'm not a political scientist, but political scientists certainly do take the work of politics and the embedded racism and intolerance that we sometimes find quite seriously. I think she's been there for 13 years, if I'm not mistaken, and she is now the outreach director. When I called her, she said, I'm jumping in a car, I'm on my way to Colorado State to talk with them, and I suspect every day she is talking with somebody else and working with them in the same way that she has worked with us, and that is to promote the values that we stand for and that the SPLC stands for. You've heard me say many, many times in the last 2 weeks, we did not invite this white supremacist group. We did not want them here. I would like nothing more than to have had them to skip our city and our town and our campus. But I want to tell you that we know who we are, and we know what our values are, and we know what our beliefs are, and I am grateful that you have felt moved to come here tonight and to be reaffirmed in who it is and what we stand for. I want to also tell you that we feel very strongly about the events and how they've been organized. I have an amazing team. I know they're all around me. Everybody on my staff has worked so hard trying to find just the right word, trying to find just the right plan, just the right moment to speak, just the right moment to act. And as we spoke with Lecia, there's not a playbook for this, but I think when I wrote on my Twitter that the hands of justice will not be erased from our rock, they won't be erased from us and from this campus. So I want you to know that on Saturday, wherever you find yourself, I want you to know this campus will be safe, this campus will be secure. Our libraries will be open. We have events happening on that day. Our security is tight, as it should be and as it will be. You've read this many times before, but let me direct you one more time. We have a free speech website. It's freespeech.utk.edu. All the questions you asked me tonight are there. There's a Q&A. We add to it every day, multiple times a day, to try and address the questions you've asked. But you came here tonight to celebrate what we believe in, the unity and the peace and the tolerance and fighting hate and standing up for justice. So without any more, I want you to hear from an expert and one of our national leaders and just how we might go about doing that. Lecia Brooks, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor. And thank you all. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. As I was telling the Chancellor and everyone that I've met so far, I want you to know that I think that you are a model, that the University of Tennessee in this moment in time is a model for other universities across the country who are facing the same thing that you are, that a white supremacist is coming to your campus to disrupt your campus. And you are doing all the right things. I understand that you're having counter-protests on Saturday. There have been lectures all this week, and you're here tonight. So thank you. I wanted to start with a moment of silence as well, and that's why, Chancellor, I really appreciate you so much. 17 people were killed yesterday. 15 people were injured. 17 people were killed yesterday and 15 people were injured. You may have heard that a white supremacist, an avowed white supremacist, Jordan Jerab, about 22 years old, has proudly proclaimed that Nicholas Cruz, the alleged shooter in Parkland, Florida, was a member of his group, the Republic of Florida. The Southern Poverty Law Center, my colleagues at the center, are researching this right now. We haven't confirmed that Mr. Cruz was a member of this group, but when we have information, it'll be on our website. But I just wanted to let you know what the latest was on that right now. This is who they are, and this is what they do. Racist ideology is steeped in violence. Let us not forget that. It's nothing to play with. Jordan Jerab, the leader of this group, the Republic of Florida, described himself as a right-wing extremist nut. He says that he didn't tell Mr. Cruz to go shoot up the school, but claims responsibility, if you can, for training him. Now, let's talk about the state of hate and extremism today, but let me start, as I always do, with the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama. That's where the Southern Poverty Law Center is. I like to start with the civil rights movement because I want to honor those individuals that came before me and before us. It's also, I think, instructive for us to remember that white supremacy and the threat of white supremacy and hate and extremism is not new. It's not new at all. It might feel like it just presented itself today or last week or last year, but it's not new. Another reason I think to remember the civil rights movement is to remember that people came together and said enough and pushed white supremacists to the margins of society. And I know that we can do that again. What we're seeing today is kind of reminiscent of the civil rights movement in the United States. We're seeing a resurgence of anti-Semitism. I don't know about you, but I think that the swastika has appeared much more in public than it has in years gone by. The fact of the matter is that anti-Semitism is on the increase in this country, and it is on the increase globally. And honestly, I don't think that we pay enough attention to it. Oops. Something just happened. Hold on a second. Oh, Brian. I need your help. It's Brian, right? Well, let me go on. I'll just talk. I know the presentation. So it talks about the increase in anti-Semitism, and then it goes on to show, you may have noticed that some Jewish cemeteries recently have been desecrated, vandalized. People's headstones have been turned over. And I can't think of a worse thing to do than to desecrate someone's resting place. It's awful. Thank you, magic person. And you can go to the next one. Thank you. We're also seeing an increase in anti-Muslim and Islamophobic events in this country. The fact of the matter is that anti-Muslim groups have tripled over the last couple of years. And anti-Muslim sentiment or Islamophobia is higher today than it was post 9/11. And 9/11 was 2001, quite some time ago. Is somebody moving these for me or no? Brian? Thank you. Let's go. I passed that one. Okay. And let's rest on this one for a second, because I can say that Islamophobia has increased, has tripled over the last few years, and it has. But have you noticed? Have you noticed these signs? Because they're everywhere. Have you noticed the sentiments? And if you have, what have you done? How have you reacted? What are you doing to push back against Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment? Go ahead, next. The Southern Poverty Law Center, you may know that we track and monitor hate and extremist groups. But what happened after the 2016 presidential election is that you may have been aware of this, and I hope you were, that there was an uptick in the number of hate and bias incidents that happened in the immediate aftermath of the election. Researchers say that white supremacists were emboldened over the course of the election. That the closer we got to Election Day and then candidate Trump's win, the more emboldened folks became. Not to say that Trump was exclusively speaking to white supremacists, but his message, his nativist agenda, resonated with that group of people. So much so that before the end of the campaign, they were claiming him as their candidate. So after he won, they were just giddy with excitement and decided to act that out by engaging in bias-related incidents all across the country. And this is something that we saw in rural areas, in urban areas, in the north, in the south, in the east, and the west. I don't know if you remember it, but they were everywhere. So the Southern Poverty Law Center put up a portal and invited people to report either incidents that they were victimized by or incidents that they witnessed that had to do with hate and bias. And about 30 days after, up to 30 days after the election, we had 1,000 submissions. Next. So what we wanted to look at in terms of those submissions, we decided to kind of dig into the data and better understand what was the motivation behind these bias incidents. And what we found is that the #1 motivation for these bias incidents was anti-immigrant sentiment. And that was really not surprising. Remember, this is right after the election. And anti-immigrant rhetoric was present throughout the campaign. Well, at least when Mr. Trump joined the campaign, he began on a very anti-Mexican note, and then it just continued to the end of the presidential campaign. So we know that when there's an increase in rhetoric that targets a particular segment of the population, it results in a higher hate and bias incidents or hate crimes that are targeting that particular group. Coming in second were anti-black motivated bias incidents. Now this is interesting because there was little or nothing about that was anti-black in the campaign. We barely came up, other than our propensity for criminality. That was about it. But I think this serves to remind us that anti-black racism in this country is something that continues to this day. And whenever there is a conversation about race, or whenever there's anything about race, black folks are brought into it. Third, we see anti-Semitism. As I mentioned, it's on the rise, followed by anti-LGBT hate and bias. If we go on to the next one, we're able to see that the next one, thank you. The incidents took place in public places, which is, shocking in and of itself. But look at which public place came in #1. K-12 classrooms and schools. K-12 schools. Children as young as elementary age were using campaign slogans as weapons against one another. Right after the election, students were telling one another, "Oh, Trump won, you're going to get kicked out of the country." And just let me say that this is not Trump bashing. This is just talking about how we came to this point in time where white supremacists are emboldened enough to launch college campus tours. So coming in third were college and university campuses, and you may have seen some of this right after the election. And this is something that has continued since that day. So today, we're not surprised to see that white supremacists and white nationalists are launching college tours and putting flyers up and posters at colleges all across the country. Thank you. Next. When we think about the hate and bias incidents that the Southern Poverty Law Center tracked, it was just anecdotal, really. We can also turn to the FBI's Department of Justice statistics. Each year, the Department of Justice and the FBI puts out a number that they say comports with the number of hate and bias crimes that happened in the United States. The report for 2016 came out, and it said that there were about 6,000 hate crimes or hate incidents that happened in the United States. I need you to know that there are far more than that. It's estimated that about 250,000 hate crimes or hate incidents happen in the United States annually. The reason why the Department of Justice statistics are so low is that law enforcement agencies voluntarily share this information with the Department of Justice. They don't have to turn in any information at all. And what happens is states or municipalities or law enforcement agencies report 0 hate crimes. In fact, only about 15,000 law enforcement agencies contributed to this number. Still, it's instructive in terms of the bias motivation behind the small number of hate crimes that we see. So if we look at FBI statistics and take these 6,000 hate crimes, we see that 57%, 57.5% of the bias crimes were motivated by bias against race, ethnicity, or ancestry. Over half, almost 60%. Coming in second was motivated by religious bias at 21%. And this is where we're at today. So when people tell you that we have some issues in this country, believe them, because it's reflected in the hate crime data. Going on to the next one. The Southern Poverty Law Center, as I mentioned, tracks and monitors hate and extremist groups. And we've been doing that since about 1999. This graph shows the increase in active hate groups in the United States since the year 2000. And as you can see, there's been a steady climb. There's about a 50% increase in active hate groups between 2000 and 2016. We just came out with the numbers for 2017, and there are going to be we're identifying 954 active hate groups in the United States. Go on to the next one, and we'll be able to see that. And I invite you to go to our website where you can take a closer look at where these hate groups are and what they are. Let me say that the Southern Poverty Law Center defines a hate group, or a group ends up on our hate map, because they have a belief or a philosophy that's reflected in their statements, in their principles, in their actions that demean an entire group of people based on their immutable characteristics. SPLC identified hate groups do not have to have committed any crime, but again, they have beliefs or practices that dehumanize an entire group of people based on their immutable characteristics. So as I mentioned, there are 954 for 2017. When we do this every year, we wipe the map clean and just, identify them anew. You can see that there's a high concentration in the South and the Southeast, and people are never surprised by that. But I draw your attention to the Northeast, where there is also a high concentration of active hate groups, and there always have been. I've come from California originally, and California, one of the most diverse states in the country, also has a large number of active hate groups. We're going to go on to the next one and see that in Tennessee, there are 37 active hate groups within your state. Now, I just pulled these numbers, so I don't have the listing of which groups they are, but I can tell you, based on last year's figures, that there were a number of Klan groups, a number of neo-Nazi groups, a number of white nationalist groups, and some black separatist groups. Let me take a moment to share with you how the Southern Poverty Law Center defines the black separatist groups, or we define them in the same way. But our identifying black separatist groups as hate groups is not to be confused with what the FBI under Attorney General Sessions is trying to do in misrepresenting black, what does he call them? Black identity extremist groups as the most deadly threat to U.S. security. That's not true at all. Our black separatist groups primarily are chapters of the Nation of Islam. Now, people often take issue with our naming the nation as a hate group, but they have been and continue to be extremely anti-white and extremely anti-Semitic and increasingly anti-LGBT. So they make up the bulk of the black separatist groups. Then there's another group called the Black Panther Party, New Black Panther Party, which is not to be confused with the original Black Panther Party. They have nothing to do with them. They're a very violent hate group as well. Now, I want you to know that even though we've seen a marked increase in hate groups over the last couple of decades, it's going down. Just this past year, in 2017, when we look at the 2018 numbers, we can tell you, we can predict with great certainty that the number of hate groups will go down. The number of active hate groups increases when a social group believes that they're losing political power or standing. So there was a tremendous increase in the number of hate groups, on the other graph showed this, during the administration of President Obama. So in 2008, through both terms, hate groups were at an all-time high. They went down a little bit after he was reelected in 2012, but hate groups have been organizing and preparing for this day that we're at today now. So that's why we're seeing an increase in hate groups and hate group activity, because they've been planning for this essentially since the Obama administration. We see an increase in hate and bias incidents when people perceive there is greater opportunity to act out this bias and not have any consequence for it. So when people feel like the opportunity is ripe and there won't be tremendous social sanctions against it, they'll engage in hate and bias incidents. That's just what happens. That's why we're seeing the increase in that. So the reason why, and this connects to Matthew Hein, Bock, the Traditionalist Workers' Party, and all the white supremacists that are pushing the false narrative that there's some kind of white genocide going on. The primary reason, the number one driver in the increase in kind of hate group membership is the shifting demographics. Now, this is what makes some white folks think that there's a white genocide afoot. Demographic shifts happen. During the 2000 census, which was the first time that people were rightfully allowed to identify themselves as multiracial, was also the first time that it was announced kind of, in the public square that whites would no longer hold a numerical majority by around the year 2043. That's when the pronouncement was made. And that's when people began to react, and react poorly, thinking that they could push back on this and change the data. You cannot. In 1970, the United States nationally looked like this: about 83% white, 17% people of color. And that is, for the United States, a very comfortable diversity. But it's not like that anymore. Today, it's about 66% white, 34% people of color. Now, that might not seem like a lot to you, but that's a pretty dramatic shift. At 66%, that's when you start hearing different languages, when you start seeing kind of signs in different languages, when you return to a neighborhood that you grew up in and it looks different, and then you begin to say, who are these people? And where's everyone that looks like me? So the shifting demographics are what is kind of amplifying or animating these hate groups and that false narrative that there's white genocide afoot. It's not true. If we look at, going to the next one, if we look at it through the lens of age, which I think is very interesting, if you look at, layer in race and age, you can see that about 75% of the population is white when you're looking at people 55 and older. 75%. But change that age group to the next one, and we see that when we go 35 to 54, it's a much different split. This is evidence of the demographic shifts that have been taking place for some time. You go on to the next one and see that we're almost at 50%. And again, under 18, it's about half and half. A few years ago, we had, which is a tremendous marker in terms of you can hold on him for a second. What do I want to say? Oh yeah, a couple of years ago, for the first time, babies of color outnumbered white babies in live births, and that's a marker of demographic shift. And a few years before that, children of color in K-12 public schools outnumbered white kids in public schools. So those are markers of demographic shifts. Nobody's manipulating that. Nobody's causing that to happen. It is happening because of birth rate and immigration. Let me also say that the fastest growing immigrant group in the United States are Asian and Pacific Islanders, not Latinos. We have a lot, we had the increase in anti-immigrant sentiment that began a couple of decades ago has to do with this as well. People think that they can change the demographics by creating, more draconian anti-immigration laws, and you cannot. If you look at it, the white population in the year 2000, the birth rate, the increase was about 15%. If it makes you feel any better, the black numbers are about at that as well. Black people are about 12 to 14% of the population nationally. That's it. You may find that hard to believe because we get blamed for an awful lot of stuff. But it's only 15%, and it'll never get higher than that. And so and if you look at kind of the multiracial categories, or people identifying as multiracial, it tends to pull from black and pull from white. So that's what our numbers are, and that's what they will be. Now you can go to my friend Andrew Anglin. So Andrew Anglin is the publisher of a neo-Nazi site called The Daily Stormer. And he is one that will take these demographic shifts and say, white people are being pushed out. And he pushes that false information on his website. He has over 400,000 people that visit his website regularly. Now, unfortunately for him, he was kicked off a number of more popular servers after the Charlottesville incident, but he's finding more and more servers, then he gets dropped off, and now he'll probably be confined to the dark web, but people will be able to find him. People like Andrew Anglin and the Daily Stormer and another neo-Nazi website called Stormfront really reach a lot of individuals. What we also notice is that there's an increase in the radicalization of individuals based on their online viewing. So a person doesn't have to join a hate group or belong to a hate group or even hang out with a hate group. As we saw with Dylan Roof in the massacre of 9 African Americans in Charleston, one could be radicalized online and become a domestic terrorist. And that is what is happening, and that's one of the many things that we're not talking about. Dylan Roof was radicalized online based on, he posted on Stormfront, he posted on the Daily Stormer, and he also posted on on the Council for Conservative Citizens. Next. So people like Andrew Anglin and those neo-Nazi websites are what helped bring over 13 different hate and extremist groups together in Charlottesville. Now, this Unite the Right rally that took place in August of last year in Charlottesville was the most blatant display of racial intimidation that we've seen in this country in a couple of decades, probably since the 1950s. I'm going to hold on this picture for a second because this happened in the United States in the open. These people were fully revealed. They weren't wearing hoods, they were proud to be filmed, and they were out in the street. People often refer to, oh, the Tiki Torch rally. It was not that. This was meant to be reminiscent of Klan rallies. It was an act of racial intimidation, and we need to call it that and identify it as that. There were thousands of people there. Let me also remind you, because lots of people don't know this or recognize this, this was a surprise rally. This was a Friday night rally. These groups had a permit to stage a rally on the campus near the Confederate Memorial. They were supposedly there to defend the Confederate Memorial to General Robert E. Lee. They were upset that the city had already ruled that it was going to be taken down. So at the Unite the Right rally, they decided to all come together and stand as one in defense of this Confederate monument. What happened was the night before the rally, they just showed up. So this is a pop-up rally. They just showed up with torches and marched on the campus, shouting Nazi slogans like blood and soil. Then, of course, they also said, "You will not replace us," and "Jews will not replace us," repeatedly. I'm lingering on this a bit because I really want us to pay attention to this. It felt like anyway, that people were upset and concerned and wanted to do something about it in the immediate aftermath. But then it just went away. But these people did not go away. In fact, Richard Spencer and other folks who came together, these were neo-Nazi groups, Klan groups, neo-Confederate groups, groups that never come together, came together. The only good thing that came out of this is that since then, they've been thrown into disarray. The thing about hate groups is that they're very ego-driven and they kind of, eat their own. So ever since the Charlottesville rally, there's no more of the Unite the Right. They're back to being individual groups, but wreaking a lot of havoc as individual groups. Next, I think it's the video. Okay, and so click this again, and then we'll have a short video clip that I want you to see. It's from Vanguard America. This is the actual rally.
Holy shit! Holy shit! That Nazi just drove into people!
Okay, you can stop. Switch to the next one. Thank you. So the first clip was Saturday, the day for which they had the permit. This was after that night rally. And as you saw, a group from Vanguard America, another neo-Nazi, white supremacist hate group, is walking down the street in daylight chanting blood and soil. They chanted all the way across campus to the Confederate Memorial with that Nazi chant. And then as you saw, a couple hours after that, a person affiliated with Vanguard America allegedly runs a car through a crowd of people, killing Heather Heyer, a white woman that's 32 years old. Again, white supremacist groups, racist groups, have always been violent, always. And make no mistake about it that it's not just in Charlottesville. As this chart shows, and I apologize, you're not able to see it all, it's not just Charlottesville. We're coming off a year of increasing violence from these white supremacist groups on the far right. In November of 2016, we had a demonstration in Portland, Oregon. In December, Roxborough, North Carolina. January 2017 in Washington, D.C. February at UC Berkeley. April, Pikeville, Kentucky. May, New Orleans, Louisiana. June, back to Portland. August in Charlottesville, and October in your state, Murfreesboro and Shelbyville. This is what is happening across this country. They're targeting college campuses more than ever. We can go to the next one. There's been about a recent report came out and said there's been about a 250% increase in the how did they frame it? The rhetoric that's targeting college campuses. And this has been primarily done through flyering. And remember, it started during the presidential campaign. There's a, go to the next one, please. The group that is primarily responsible, or is responsible for the majority of flyering incidents that have happened across the country, and there's been about 400, a couple hundred colleges and universities, has been Identity Europa. They're the ones that maybe you've seen their posters. They appear to be innocuous. They have, you know, statues of Michelangelo, David. They have posters that say, you know, what does it say? What does it say? Serve your people. Thank you. Seems safe enough. These people, Identity Europa, started this campaign that they called Project Siege in 2016. They were just this small group in California that just had an online presence. And now this group has a presence across the entire country and are in physical space. So they moved from an online presence to a physical presence in just a year. Go on to the next one. We see signs and flyers that are, and I want you to notice this because white supremacists, I think, I don't know what people think sometimes when they think, what are white supremacists against? Are they just pro-white? They are pro-white, but they're also anti-anything other, right? So we see flyers that are anti-immigrant. It says, my borders, my choice. Oh, you already went ahead. We see pro-Nazi flyers. And if you ever see flyers from this group, Atomwaffen Division, they are a violent group of neo-Nazis. Maybe not that many followers, but enough. This group was, well, we think that this group is responsible. The alleged killer of Blaise Bernstein, a college student, he was killed by someone who belonged to Atomwaffen Division. Then, of course, there's back to Identity Europa and their pro-Western civilization, Serve Your People, Project Siege, and all of that. And then your unwelcome visitor, TRAD, the Traditionalist Workers' Party, Faith, Family, and Folk. Don't buy that at all. It's a tagline created to pull you in. Go on to the next one. So if you go to, again, visit the SPLC website, you'll be able to see we're tracking these flyers. And as I mentioned, Vanguard America, Identity Europa is #1, Vanguard America is #2. And a number of other groups are flyering as well. And as you see, it's been all across the country. Going to the next one. These are a number of hate and extremist groups, white nationalist groups, white supremacist groups that have been on college campuses recently. Next. So Identity Europa, remember I said they kind of eat their young, and though they've grown, they've had a change in leadership. They're in the third leader. Now this guy, Patrick Casey, is the leader and wants to separate themselves, separate Identity Europa from the alt-right movement, and they're now calling themselves identitarians. I raise this because it's important that you know the lingo. White nationalist was a rebranding of white supremacy. Alt-right was a rebranding of white nationalists and white supremacy. And identitarian is also a rebranding. These people, and they say this themselves, they are advocating for a white ethnic nation, a separate nation for white people. This is their goal, all of them, universally. That's what they want. And we cannot allow that to happen. Go on to the next one. So this guy, Richard Spencer, who is probably the most well-known white supremacist out there, and he's worked real hard at it. He kind of tried to follow in the footsteps of Milo Yiannopoulos, who had a college campus tour in 2016, also during the presidential campaign. And Richard Spencer saw how much attention Milo was getting, and he decided he wanted to get some attention too. So he launched his campus tour. And you can go to his YouTube page, and he says it right there. He selected Texas A&M and got so much attention that he decided that he was going to keep doing it. But let me tell you a little bit about Richard Spencer, the self-avowed white nationalist who also advocates for a white ethnic nation. He advocates for what he calls a peaceful ethnic cleansing. This guy, his family, he makes his money off of farm subsidies based on property that was in his family, cotton farms that were in his family in Louisiana. This is who he is and where he gets his money. Go on to the next one. So now we come to Mr. Hein Bock, and I want to tell you a little bit about him. No need to go see him. I can tell you all you need to know. Matthew Hein Bock tries to present himself as, this working class, poor, disaffected white guy, poor me. He was raised in an affluent area in Maryland. He went to Townsend University, and in 2011, while he was a student at Townsend, he starts an organization called Youth for Western Civilization. Youth for Western Civilization. So he always had this white nationalist kind of tendency. His advisor was Jewish. Guess he didn't really realize at first what the group was about. But then the group started tagging, chalking around the school white pride, and the advisor said, oh, I gotta go. So then his group was no more. Youth for Western Civilization was for no more. He couldn't find another advisor. Well, in 2013, he decides to start a white student union. Again, he couldn't get an advisor, but he said he started kind of an unofficial club, and he attracted people. And he attracted them using kind of these old racist tropes. It's like, we are here to protect white women walking across campus from black men. And people believed him, and people joined him. He graduated from Townsend University and went on to found a group called the Traditionalist Youth Network, before the Traditionalist Workers' Party, which is a political party. It was short-lived. So now he lives in Indiana in a trailer park and invites other white people to live with him and tries to pass himself off as this poor working class white guy that, you know, has been abandoned by society like other white guys. He pushes that narrative that nobody cares about white people but me. So his whole family, folks, what was it? Family, folks, and faith. It means nothing, right? He is trying to sell himself, and really, I think, doing a tremendous disservice. I was at the University of Kentucky a couple of weeks ago talking to this newbie recruit who was listening to some of this stuff, and he's like, white people are disappearing, and you know, he lives in Appalachia, and you know, things are bad. Yeah, things are bad in Appalachia. They always have been. And you better believe that Matthew Heimbach is not going to do anything to change that situation. But he's telling people that we're going to give you job training, we're going to train you as steel workers, we're going to help you with your opiate addiction, and we are going to be the group that you come to for help, because white people cannot go anyplace else. You need us. He's done nothing. He's been pushing this thing that he's there to help the disaffected, marginalized, working, poor white person, and he hasn't done a thing. He is going around the country and internationally to make a name for himself. He sees himself, or wants to see himself, as this big revolutionary figure. Go on to the next one. So, you know, he sees himself, he wants to be this general, and you know, he has people that follow him around, and he comes to places like the University of Tennessee or to the Women's March in Tennessee and takes a stand. But believe me, he never has, usually has close to 25 people, maybe 50 if he's lucky, if another group is involved. Go into the next one. So you may recall during the presidential campaign that Matthew Heimbach, and click it again, is the one that attacked a black woman. Ended up pleading guilty and was found guilty and admitted that he did it. Click it one more time to think it'll come.
Rally today with several interruptions by anti-Trump protesters.
There he is with the red hat.
Protester did interrupt him, Trump would yell, "Get them out of here," and many were escorted out by police. Some protesters had signs that read, "Love Trump's hate." Some wore shirts that read Muslim, American, or Mexican. African American. Another thing that Trump mentioned several times was the Saturday Republican caucus.
So this is who he is. He's a bully. He's a fraud. He cares about no one but himself. I understand, going to the next one. I understand that you all are planning, hello, next, thank you. Let's see, hello, go, thank you. Okay, so I understand that there's a couple of counter protests that are scheduled for Saturday, and I think that's great. My counsel or advice, my pleading for you is to not give him what he wants. What he wants is you to confront him and his people face to face and start a verbal confrontation. That's what he wants. That's what he depends on. That's how he creates a media spectacle. That's how he can tell people that, see, they won't let the white man speak. They won't, you know, they're bridging my First Amendment rights. Colleges are these just bastions of liberal thought. They don't want to hear anything else. So he's announced a lecture, and as I understand it, he's passing out tickets himself, but you have to like qualify to get in. That people are going to be vetted as they try to make their way in. Don't go in. He's not going to say anything. Go on to the next one. Next, please. So he has created this false sense that he and Trad are this huge group, and they are not. Anybody can put up a website. He has a logo, yes. Go on to the next one. And then you got a good graphic designer to announce his speaking tour. Remember, he's coming late to the party. He's trying to create a name for himself. Don't allow him to do it. The Southern Poverty Law Center promotes nonviolent peaceful protests. I believe it's the only way that positive change happens. But you have to do it on your own terms, not on their terms. You have to be creative in the ways that you protest. Don't let them take the narrative. Don't let them have the attention, get the attention. Make them stand on their own, be revealed for who they are, the 25 or 30 people that are there, and have you be the story and not them. They'll become the story when you engage them in a yelling match or in a shouting match. That's what he wants. Don't do it. They come to colleges and universities that they believe are progressive or liberal or have an appreciation for diversity and inclusion so that they can trigger students. Their words. They're hoping to trigger you. And in taking this from the playbook from the civil rights movement in terms of exposing the so-called bad guy, they're positioning themselves as the good guy. So then when it comes on TV, the students are the counter-protesters are yelling and screaming, and then it looks like, you know, Matthew Hein, Bock and his group are the nice guys. Go on to the next one. So student protests have been happening, you can go, have been happening for some time and will continue to happen. Next. And you can just slide through these. It's a tradition. It's a tradition that should continue. It's a tradition that was born out of the civil rights movement. People protest injustice, and you should. We have a guide, and I put some up front, that we created this guide so that students would know who these people are, these personalities, these people that seem bigger than life. Who are they really? That's the information that we want to share, and some advice as to how you should engage them in counter-protests. Next. We also have a guide called Bystander Intervention. And this has less to do with fighting a hate group on campus or standing up against a hate group on campus, but this has more to do with standing up when bias or bigotry, something happens in your space. When you see something happen, when you see someone or observe someone being treated disrespectfully because of who they are, when you hear, witness biased and bigoted language, what do you do? What do you say? Are you paralyzed? You don't know what to do? That happens to most people, especially if there's a crowd. People think, oh, somebody else is going to say something. And then nobody says anything. We've all seen these viral videos of people, mostly Latinos, being yelled at in the store by some shopper, and everyone just standing aghast. The Bystander Intervention guy will give you tips as to how to intervene. You could practice. What will you say when this happens in your presence? And it will happen. So prepare for that moment. Because when we decide we're not going to say anything, we're not going to do anything, biased and bigoted behavior becomes normalized. And then that's on us. When we don't stand up against hate groups that come on campus, we allow that behavior to be normalized. Hate groups are not pushing intellectual discourse, right? There's no two sides on that, right? It's not an intellectual debate. White supremacy is wrong. And people need to stand against it. We just have to be smart about how we do it. Next one. And then lastly, there's a guide called 10 Ways to Fight Hate. This is more of a community guide. It will give you tips on how to organize folks in your community, and you could use it on campus as well. These are all free resources that are found on the Southern Poverty Law Center website. Next. I know I've given you a lot of information. I hope that some of it's helpful to you. I want to end where I began with the Civil Rights Memorial and really bring some attention to the quote that's on the wall. Dr. King delivered this line during the March on Washington for Freedom and Jobs. Most people refer to that as the I Have a Dream speech. But it started out differently. This was in 1963, and people that were engaged in civil rights protests had been at it for almost a decade. I mean, in earnest, the movement anyway. And things didn't seem like they were changing, and people were upset. And that's why people went to Washington, D.C. to demand change. So Dr. King, when he began his speech, he quoted the book of Amos, or paraphrase from the book of Amos 5:24. Where it starts out saying, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. That's a mantra, a gift that I give you. That's something that me and my colleagues at the Southern Poverty Law Center try to live by. We've seen tremendous change, but not enough. Justice is not rolling down like waters. There is so much work to be done, and you have to do it. Now, I'm speaking to the college students in particular. You have to do it. That's how change happens in this world, not just in the United States, but globally. It's driven by young people and primarily college students. It happened during the Civil Rights Movement. It happened in the anti-apartheid movement. It happened in Tiananmen Square. It happened at Arab Spring. Young people push social change. So it's on you to do that until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Thank you. Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you. Oh, no, please don't. Please, please. It was, you're standing for the person who was behind the curtain that did the thing. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Brian and friends, thank you. There are mics up, and we can engage in a little question and answer. Feel free to counter my points. I enjoy that. Let's do that. Or if you want to make a point. Thank you all for coming. You all that have to leave, appreciate you. It's fine, I think. I appreciate it. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Darius Upton, the College of Social Work. First of all, thank you for coming and sharing this information with us. I have a question about our outlying community. We have probably about 19,000 or so, Chancellor, is that right? Commuter students here.
Commuter?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're from the local area.
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of this has been geared towards college students in general, but these students live here as well, and some of these groups you mentioned in your presentation are based here in East Tennessee. So what would you say to those students as far as dealing with these groups once we leave this university, but we are still here in Tennessee, still probably having to deal with these groups, and how do we continue to have our university actively involved with the outlying community as far as dealing with this as well?
Thank you. That's a really good question, and that's something that I think the Chancellor and administrators at the college should always reach out to the community, invite them to be a part of these sessions, invite them to be a part of the counter-protests, invite them to stand together. You stand together as one with the whole community. Now, as far as folks who live in the community that run across groups, they're typically going to run across individuals who may share that hate ideology. First, they have to see to their own safety. You might not want to stand up to someone individually if they call you out. But if you can, you know, challenge them on it. If you feel like it's safe, you know, challenge them on their thinking or their thought or whatever it was that they said that indicated that they were, you know, on the far right or had some extreme opinions. I would also invite people and urge people to report any hate or bias incidents to law enforcement. If it happens on the on campus, report it to campus security, campus law enforcement. There's the Clery Act, and these things have to be reported. Report it to local law enforcement, and if you feel like someone's not paying attention to you, they're not taking it seriously, then push it up the chain until you get to somebody who will take it seriously. You could share the resources and research from the Southern Poverty Law Center and we have this information specifically for law enforcement. We want them to know about the threat from domestic terrorists. We have information and ways to train law enforcement. We've been talking to campus police in terms of being able to better identify who these folks are. So there's lots of resources out there. And I say, again, I didn't say this earlier, but just to state the obvious, there are more of us than there are of them. We've allowed them, just because it's been it was the worst presidential campaign that I've ever lived through, and they became emboldened and came out of the woodwork. I don't for a minute think that, you know, there weren't racists before then, but they were in the margins. Now they're just in the open, and we cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen. They have to be pushed back in the hole, out. We can't allow it to happen.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. I wanted to let everybody know that we are having a rally before the rally here in Knoxville, actually in Oak Ridge, and we're pleased that we'll have the David Clark, who's the Anderson County District Attorney, coming to talk with us factually about what's happening in Anderson County. It's at 9:30 at the Unitarian Church. Everybody's welcome to come. And one of the things that David said is that we can make a difference. When people act and they are present and they say, this is not acceptable, it does change the outcomes. So I just want to thank you for sharing this with us and to let you know, in those communities outside of Knoxville, be active, you know, get people together and say, no, not here. So thank you.
Thank you. If I could add something, thank you for the Unitarians are great, thank you. Standing on the side of love, always. Let me say something about the point about we can do something and we can say something. And now I'm talking to the white people. You have to say something too, right? It can't be just the marginalized people. It can't be the people that are being attacked, the people that are at the other end or the target of the hate. You have to stand up too and say, I don't stand for white supremacy. That is not me, and you will not speak for all white people, whatever it is that you're going to tell them. Stand up against them and say, no, no, you do not represent me. Then talk to your kids and talk to them about what it means to be white and start talking about it now before they get to them and tell them that to be white is to be a supremacist. That's not the only way to be white. There have been anti-racist white people since there was racism, right? So you take back the narrative and talk to your folks because we can't do it by ourselves. We can't. And nothing will really change. White students, white young males are vulnerable, especially on college campuses, because there's nobody to talk to. Nobody's talking to them. They're left in this limbo kind of place. They come to college campuses and hear diversity and inclusion and hear, you know, white privilege and don't have a clue as to how they fit in or what they're supposed to do. Somebody needs to talk to them. Typically, students, when they enter a university, a campus, a college or university, they're coming from very segregated communities. They don't know. So again, talk to them. Okay, sorry.
Hi, I am a graduate student in cultural anthropology here at University of Tennessee. Also, I am the spokesperson for the Women's March Coalition.
All right.
That had our event almost hijacked by Nazis. And, you know, 14,000 compared to 25, so there you go. But I guess I wanted you to speak a little bit more. We kind of rushed through the sort of idea of counter-protest, and I know we've also had action at the Confederate Monument. That was sort of the first real big counter-protest that we had, and again, it was 25 against 3,000. So we know that we're outnumbering them, but there's a lot of debate within the community of how to handle this. We have people that say, no, we should do something off-site, a kumbaya love fest, you know, a lot of folks that say, no, we need direct action to say no, and so I agree with not engaging them directly, giving them media attention and all that kind of stuff, but if you could just speak more to how we can effectively sort of say no and yet not give them the attention. I mean, I'm so frustrated that our taxpayer dollars, our city dollars are going to this sort of thing because of Charlottesville. We have to take it seriously, but it changed the whole feel and nature of the Women's March event. We had it hijacked 7 days before, you know, it didn't look like how we planned it because of them. So a very vocal small minority dictated that we would have 100 state troopers and people wanted and all this stuff. So I guess if you could just kind of, again, how we can effectively make a stand and yet not give them the attention they want. So.
Well, thank you. I think that the example that you gave or you provided for us through the Women's March, I mean, it did have all that kind of, you know, their spectacle, I remember. And that offers me an opportunity to remind folks that white supremacists, these guys are also anti-feminists. They're awful misogynists. They came to the Women's March because they wanted to tell women what to do. that women do not need to be out marching. Women need to be kind of home with their man. They don't recruit women because they feel like the man that's recruited will bring along his woman if she's acceptable. They are awful. So if you can't even get behind the white supremacy thing, maybe you could get behind this misogynistic thing. Okay, so I just think that we have to be more creative. You all continued with the Women's March as it was. Don't let them hijack your event. Do your thing. Do what you're going to do, and you did. Now, yes, it is a shame that more law enforcement had to come, but they were also there for your protection. So be that as it may. The story, the media story, was you all, the Women's March. The women showed up, the march still happened, they were far outnumbered, and they were the background of the story instead of in the foreground. I think sometimes we put them in the foreground. Now, I'm for direct action, and direct action, even confrontational direct action, doesn't have to play into their hands. I've seen a lot of different things, like, the students at Stanford, when somebody came there, they bought up all the seats and came in, had signs, and as soon as the person started talking, they held up their signs and then silently left. So things like that. I think that you can also counter-protest, go up to their line, have some signs that say, you know, we don't believe in white supremacy, whatever you want to say, down with white supremacy, down with Nazis, whatever you would scream, right? Have that be on your sign, and be silent sentries. It would drive them nuts for you to, like, not say anything when they're, because they're just trying to trigger you. And they're, oh, you're not going to talk, or you're not, and you're just there. Do you remember, we were talking about this, the angels, remember the AIDS thing, oh, you may not remember. You may not be old enough, I don't know.
I'm old.
But when people get creative in their protests, it's a beautiful thing. It's not all about just getting up in their face yelling, because that's what they want. And it gets you nothing. It just gets them more attention. Tell you, let them get bored with you, right? Let them be frustrated with you, and they will find someplace else to go.
Thank you.
And students, and we can do that. We can do it. I know it's really hard, because I want to yell back too. But we've got to get control of this thing. Because right now, they're controlling the narrative.
So you said the challenge you may be some. As a legal advisor, do you feel that there is precedent and or legal standing for a public university to bar these outside groups from espousing their violent rhetoric on their campus, especially in light of this violent rhetoric that just happened that caused the murder of 17 teenagers yesterday?
I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you legal advice. I can tell you this, that there are very few restrictions to the First Amendment. One of them has to be threat of imminent danger. One of them is inciting other people to violence. Unfortunately, you cannot predict the incitement to violence. You can guess it. Yeah, they're probably going to say this, but you don't know. You don't know. And the fact of the matter is that that's not typically what they say at these events. They say nothing, but they're not inciting the group to violence. That they do that at home and meet, on their own. But they don't do that. They know how to play this game on the First Amendment better than we do. And we need to learn what our rights are and what we can do. And what we can do in terms of counter-protest. Because we have a right to protest too. So we just have to figure out how to do that. And I understand that I don't want them here. This is why I go across the country and talk. I cannot stand these people. And all I want is for them to go back into their hole. And so I am asking you, begging you to help us do that. I can't do it by myself. You can't do it by yourself. But we can do it together. I believe that. I really do. Mm-hmm.
Hello, good evening.
Ooh.
First, I'd like to say thank you for the wealth of information that you've shared with us.
Thank you.
But right now, I'm currently attending the University of Tennessee. I'm a sophomore in the College of Communications and Information. My question is, when situations such as the video clip happen, where there's a protest and there's like no gate or whatever, and people like Hein Bock and his people are able to push the young people, or even the older people, but whoever is trying to express their voice and concern, outside of mental capacity, how do we physically fight back without being like violent? Like, how do we react to that? Seeing those 3, 4, 5 older gentlemen pushing that young black girl like that, and it's like the crowd of people just standing there, nobody's reacting, and that just instantly makes me think, what if I'm out with my mom or just a friend, and the person being vandalized like that doesn't necessarily have to be a person of color, but anybody I care about. How do we really react to that?
Well, thank you. It's disturbing for me every time I see it too. First, it's important to remember that she went into that space, right? It was like going into hostile territory. She shouldn't have been by herself. Like, so if you're ever gonna kind of protest in somebody else's space, you're not gonna be by yourself. Secondly, and importantly, people were made to answer in court for those acts, Hein Bock in particular. And I think the older guy too, the older guy who had the veteran kind of outfit on, I think. But I know Hein Bock had to answer criminal charges for that. So what you can do is take pictures with your phone, record kind of what's happening, and press charges, right? You have to do that. I don't know if you heard about the craziness that was happening in Charlottesville. Apparently, anybody can bring charges against anybody there. And they were bringing charges against the brother who got beat up by the Nazis, right? So they finally figured that out, and now, because of video footage, other people are being called to task. Richard Spencer, for one, is being sued. So you just have to record it, not be by yourself. You can always take care of your mom, you know. Block. Try not to hit back. Block. Because they will try to use that against you. Even though you're acting in self-defense, you're a black man. They're going to assume that you say no more. Trayvon Martin. That's it.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
And I'm
Trayvon
sorry about
Martin.
that. And I'm sorry that that's the reality that we have to live with. But I want to see you alive and finish your career. You have a great voice.
Thank you.
Should we stop there? I want to thank the ASL interpreters. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful job. Forgive me if I went too fast at times. It's just passionate. But thank you. If I'm going to hang out for a little while if y'all want to talk later. Let me say again that I really, really appreciate you coming. I appreciate the Chancellor. I appreciate the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. You're doing great. You are. Everything that the Chancellor has put into place in terms of educating you all about white supremacy and free speech and these lectures that are being made available to you, looking after your safety and the safety of counter-protesters, encouraging counter-protesters. It's not happening at every college and university, I can tell you that. So I want you all to continue to be a model. I'm going to be watching on Saturday. Everyone's going to be watching on Saturday. Don't let them claim the narrative. You claim it. Show them y'all, your vols means y'all, or whatever that thing is. Thank you.